When the United States government issues an urgent directive telling its citizens to leave a country immediately, the message is never casual. When that country is Iran, and the directive comes with coordinated military repositioning across the Middle East, you are watching the final diplomatic off-ramps disappear in real time. On February 4, 2026, the State Department elevated Iran to Level 4 Do Not Travel status and issued an emergency alert instructing all American citizens currently in Iran to depart by any available means. The language was unambiguous, the timeline was immediate, and the implications are impossible to ignore. This is not the first time Washington has warned Americans about Iran. Travel advisories have been in place for years, but this escalation carries a different weight. It coincides with the largest buildup of American naval assets in the Persian Gulf since the opening weeks of the Iraq War. It follows a series of intercepted communications suggesting imminent attacks on U.S. facilities across the region. And it arrives just weeks after a covert operation in Venezuela demonstrated that the current administration is willing to use military force unilaterally, without congressional approval, and without waiting for international consensus. The question being asked in every defense ministry from Tel Aviv to Riyadh to Beijing is simple. Is this preparation or is this posturing? And if it is preparation, what exactly is Washington preparing for? The answers matter because the Persian Gulf is not Venezuela. It is the artery through which 21% of the world's oil supply flows daily. It is home to American military bases in Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and the UAE. It sits at the intersection of three nuclear powers, Israel, Pakistan, and potentially Iran. And any miscalculation, any unintended escalation, any failure of deterrence in this region does not stay contained. It radiates outward through energy markets, through shipping lanes, through alliance structures that have kept great power conflict at bay for decades. To understand why this moment is so dangerous, you need to understand how we arrived here. The U.S.-Iran relationship has been hostile for 47 years, ever since the 1979 revolution that toppled the American-backed Shah and replaced him with an Islamic republic that defined itself in opposition to Western influence. But the current crisis has more immediate roots. In 2018, the Trump administration withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the nuclear deal negotiated under Obama that had placed strict limits on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. That withdrawal was followed by a campaign of maximum pressure, crippling economic sanctions designed to force Tehran back to the negotiating table on American terms. The strategy did not work. Iran's economy contracted sharply, inflation soared, the currency collapsed. But instead of capitulating, Tehran doubled down. They began enriching uranium beyond the limits set by the JCPOA. They expanded their ballistic missile program. They deepened military cooperation with Russia and China, and they intensified support for proxy forces across the region. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. Iran has spent decades building what defense analysts call a ring of fire around Israel and American interests, a network of non-state actors that can strike without Tehran directly entering a conflict. Over the last 18 months, that network has been activated repeatedly. Houthi forces in Yemen, armed with Iranian missiles and drones, have targeted commercial shipping in the Red Sea, forcing vessels to reroute around Africa and driving up global shipping costs by as much as 400% on some routes. Hezbollah has launched sporadic rocket attacks into northern Israel, forcing evacuations and keeping tens of thousands of Israeli civilians displaced. Iraqi militias have struck American bases in Syria and Iraq more than 60 times since October 2023. Each individual attack is carefully calibrated to stay below the threshold that would trigger massive retaliation. But cumulatively, they represent a sustained campaign of attrition designed to make the American presence in the region untenable. The United States has responded with a mixture of defensive measures and limited strikes. Air defense systems have intercepted most incoming fire. Precision strikes have targeted weapons depots and command centers. But the fundamental strategic problem remains unsolved. How do you deter an adversary that operates primarily through proxies? How do you hold Iran accountable when the attacks are carried out by groups that maintain plausible deniability? And how do you prevent escalation when every response risks triggering a broader regional war. The travel advisory issued on February 4th suggests that Washington may have decided it can no longer manage this dynamic through restraint. According to intelligence briefings reviewed by multiple defense correspondents, U.S. signals intelligence detected communications indicating that Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps units were preparing coordinated attacks on American diplomatic facilities, possibly including the U.S. interest section in Baghdad, the consulate in Erbil, and contractor sites across Iraq and Syria. The intercepts reportedly included references to timing, target selection, and coordination with proxy forces. If those intercepts are accurate, and if Iranian forces were indeed preparing simultaneous attacks on multiple American facilities, then the calculus in Washington shifts dramatically. You cannot wait for an attack on an embassy to occur and then respond. The political and human cost of American diplomats under siege, or worse, creates pressure for massive retaliation that could spiral out of control. So the decision was made to pull non-essential personnel, issue the emergency travel directive, and position military assets for either defensive or offensive operations, depending on how the situation develops. The military positioning is extensive and deliberate. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, which had been operating in the Western Pacific, was redirected to the Arabian Sea in late January. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group, which had been conducting operations in the Eastern Mediterranean, moved through the Suez Canal and is now stationed in the Red Sea. That gives the United States 2 carrier groups within striking range of Iranian territory. Each carrier is accompanied by guided missile cruisers, destroyers, and a submarine. Each carries approximately 60 aircraft capable of delivering precision strikes across the full range of Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure. In addition to naval assets, the Air Force has surged fighter squadrons to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE. B-52 strategic bombers have been deployed to Diego Garcia, the remote island base in the Indian Ocean that serves as a staging point for long-range strikes. Refueling tankers, reconnaissance aircraft, and electronic warfare platforms have all been moved into theater. The logistics alone, the fuel, the munitions, the maintenance crews, represent a multi-billion-dollar operation that does not get authorized unless the intent is serious. Diplomatically, the situation has deteriorated in parallel. Indirect talks between Washington and Tehran, mediated by Oman and Qatar, have collapsed. Iranian officials walked away from the most recent round in late January, citing what they described as American unwillingness to offer meaningful sanctions relief. American officials accused Iran of making impossible demands while continuing to enrich uranium to levels just short of weapons grade. The International Atomic Energy Agency reported in its most recent quarterly assessment that Iran now possesses enough highly enriched uranium that, if further enriched, could produce material for multiple nuclear warheads within weeks. This is the nightmare scenario that has haunted Western policymakers for 2 decades. And Iran on the threshold of nuclear weapons capability, with delivery systems already in place, operating in an environment where diplomatic channels have broken down and military tensions are escalating. Israel has made clear repeatedly that it views an Iranian nuclear weapon as an existential threat. Prime Minister Netanyahu has stated publicly that Israel will act unilaterally if necessary to prevent Iran from acquiring the bomb. American intelligence assessments suggest that Israel has conducted multiple rounds of planning for strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, including underground enrichment sites at Fordow and Natanz. The problem with a military strike on Iran's nuclear program is that it does not eliminate the program. It delays it. Iraq's Osirak reactor was destroyed by Israel in 1981. Saddam Hussein's nuclear ambitions were set back but not ended. Syria's suspected reactor site was struck in 2007. The program went underground. Iran's facilities are hardened, dispersed, and in some cases buried under mountains. Even a sustained air campaign would struggle to destroy every critical node, and the retaliation would be immediate and severe. Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which 1/5 of global oil passes daily. They have the missile systems to target tankers, the naval mines to block shipping lanes, and the small boat swarms to harass naval vessels. Closing Hormuz, even temporarily, would send oil prices above $150 per barrel within days, triggering inflation spikes, supply chain disruptions, and economic pain across every oil-importing nation. That includes the United States, Europe, China, India, and Japan. The economic shockwave would be global and immediate. Beyond the strait, Iran's proxy network would activate across the region. Hezbollah, with an estimated 150,000 rockets and missiles, could launch sustained barrages into Israeli cities, overwhelming missile defense systems and forcing mass evacuations or sheltering. Houthi forces could intensify attacks on Saudi infrastructure and Red Sea shipping. Iraqi militias could overrun smaller American outposts and target the embassy in Baghdad. The entire regional architecture, already fragile, could collapse into multi-front warfare that draws in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Turkey, and potentially even Russia, which has defense agreements with Iran and military assets in Syria. This is why the travel advisory matters. It is not just about protecting American civilians. It is a signal to adversaries and allies alike that the United States is moving from crisis management to crisis preparation. Every country in the region is now making calculations based on the assumption that conflict is not just possible, but increasingly probable. Saudi Arabia, which has spent years trying to ease tensions with Iran and secure its energy infrastructure, is reportedly in quiet talks with Tehran to ensure that any U.S.-Iran conflict does not expand into Saudi territory. The UAE has similarly sought to de-escalate its own tensions with Iran, closing certain intelligence cooperation channels with the U.S., and signaling that it will not allow its territory to be used as a base for strikes. These moves represent a fundamental crack in the American alliance structure in the Gulf. For decades, the United States provided security guarantees in exchange for basing rights, intelligence sharing, and political alignment. But as Washington becomes more willing to use force unilaterally, regional partners are hedging. They fear being dragged into conflicts they did not choose. They worry about Iranian retaliation against their infrastructure and populations. And they question whether American military power can deliver decisive outcomes without triggering chaos that leaves them more vulnerable, not less. China is watching this closely. Beijing has invested heavily in Middle Eastern energy infrastructure and has positioned itself as a neutral broker in regional disputes. The surprise Saudi-Iran rapprochement, brokered by China in 2023, was a diplomatic blow to American influence. If the United States launches military action against Iran, China will use the resulting instability to deepen its relationships with Gulf states, offering economic partnerships without the military entanglements that come with American alliances. Russia, already aligned with Iran through arms sales and intelligence cooperation, will likewise benefit from any American overreach that alienates regional partners. The domestic political dimension cannot be ignored. President Trump faces pressure from multiple directions. Hardliners in his administration and in Congress have long advocated for regime change in Tehran. They argue that Iran is weakened by economic sanctions, internal dissent, and regional isolation, and that now is the moment to strike. But military planners and intelligence officials warn that a conflict with Iran would be protracted, expensive, and unlikely to achieve clean outcomes. There is no clear successor regime waiting in exile. There is no guarantee that military strikes would produce political change rather than nationalist backlash that strengthens the regime. Trump's own instincts are unpredictable. He campaigned on ending forever wars and avoiding new military entanglements. But he also responds viscerally to perceived threats and humiliation. If American personnel are killed in an Iranian-backed attack, the political pressure to retaliate massively will be overwhelming. The Venezuela operation demonstrated that Trump is willing to use force decisively when he believes American interests are at stake. The question is whether he views Iran through the same lens, or whether the scale and risk of a Persian Gulf conflict give him pause. The most dangerous scenario is not a deliberate decision for war. It is an accidental escalation that neither side can walk back. An Iranian proxy attack that kills American soldiers, an American retaliatory strike that hits a target with broader consequences than intended, a misidentified radar contact that triggers defensive fire, a cyber attack that disables critical infrastructure. In an environment where military forces are positioned in close proximity, where tensions are high, where communication channels are thin, the margin for error disappears. One miscalculation, one bad decision in the heat of crisis, and the region is at war. History offers no comfort. The lead up to the Iraq War in 2003 followed a similar pattern. Intelligence warnings, military buildup, diplomatic breakdown, travel advisories, and then the decision to strike based on assessments that later proved flawed. The consequences: 2 decades of instability, trillions of dollars in costs, hundreds of thousands of lives lost, and a Middle East that remains fractured and volatile. Iran is not Iraq. It has 3 times the population, 4 times the land area, mountainous terrain that makes invasion nearly impossible, and battle-hardened forces that have been preparing for American attack for 40 years. The travel advisory is the clearest signal yet that the off-ramps are closing. Diplomacy has stalled. Military assets are in position. Intelligence suggests imminent threats, and the political will to absorb continued attacks without major retaliation is exhausted. What happens next depends on decisions being made in Washington, Tehran, Tel Aviv, and a dozen other capitals where leaders are weighing risk, cost, and the possibility that this time the escalation does not stop. For American citizens still in Iran, the message is unambiguous: leave now. For the rest of the world, the message is equally clear: prepare for instability, volatility in energy markets, potential disruptions to global trade, and the possibility that the fragile post-Cold War order is about to face its most serious test in a generation. This is not speculation. This is reading the signals that governments send when they are preparing for conflict. The question is no longer whether tensions are high. The question is whether anyone has the leverage, the judgment, or the will to pull back before it is too late. And right now, the evidence suggests that the answer is no.